Hello and welcome to the channel. I am Johnny Boy and today we're going to be taking a look at, as if the intro to this video or the Ruby Whiteout demo haven't given it away already, it's the Radeon HD 2900 XT, the pinnacle of space heater technology. We will also be able to compare it to the last card that I reviewed, the GeForce 7900 GTX. So let's see what this behemoth can do. In 2007, ATI unleashed their HD 2000 series to the market, starting with the flagship, the Radeon HD 2900 XT on May 14th. It used ATI's first unified shader model architecture, Terascale. Actually, that's not completely true, since ATI's Xenos GPU that they developed for the Xbox 360 that, remember, came out in 2005, used a unified shader architecture. That feature, along with a few others, were brought into Terascale. Now, this was the beginning of an architecture that ATI would use all the way up until Terascale 3 in 2011. The HD 2900 XT had 320 stream processors clocked at 743 MHz, and 512 megabytes of GDDR3 clocked at 828 MHz on a 512-bit bus. Now, there was also a 1 GB version of this card that used GDDR4, but from what I can tell, the performance difference was negligible. This card also had many new features, including support for DirectX 10, that's a first for ATI, Shader Model 4.0, OpenGL 3.0, and hardware tessellation. The 2900 XT comes out swinging in our first game, Painkiller. The 7900 GTX isn't able to beat the new competitor here. Both cards produce very playable frame rates, however, in every resolution, but the Radeon card manages to produce enough to feed a 120Hz refresh rate monitor at the highest resolution, if that's something that you're into. With Half-Life 2, we see a similar story from what we saw in the last video. The average frame rates are very close to what the X1900 XT brought to the table in this game. But the 2900 XT gives us a nice boost to the minimum frame rates in every resolution, while the 7900 GTX struggles to keep the minimum frame rate in playable territory at higher resolutions. Now to Call of Duty 2, where the 2900 XT once again produces some pretty solid numbers. This is another loss for the 7900 GTX, although neither card manages to stay above the 60 FPS mark in 1280 by 1024 or 1080p. Next up is Quake 4. As we can see, the numbers for 1024 by 768 and 1280 by 1024 are very close for both cards, mostly due to the fact that this game has a 60 FPS frame lock with this version of the game, and my reasoning for that has been detailed in previous videos. Nonetheless, both cards also fail to load at 1600 by 1200, which is a bit odd since the 1900 XT had no issues running at that frame rate of the last video. F.E.A.R screams into the next test to show some pretty lackluster performance for the HD 2900 XT. It manages to best the 7900 GTX here, but its numbers are lower than what the 1900 XT provided in the last video. Though I have not tested this particular game with other drivers, I suspect it would have boosted the 2900 XT's performance in this game. I actually had a lot of driver issues during these tests, but that's something I will wait to the end of the video to cover. In Oblivion, the 2900 XT's numbers once again seem a bit underwhelming. It does manage to beat the 7900 GTX again, but I would have expected a much bigger beating here. Now this is mostly going to be due to the fact that I'm testing this game with VSync on. This is not something that I have detailed in previous videos, so the reason why I use VSync to test Oblivion is because if you don't have VSync on, anytime you open up any kind of in-game menu, whether it's a pause menu or an inventory screen, the game produces really ridiculous FPS numbers that skew your results. So in an effort to try to get more accurate numbers, I have to test this game with VSync on. And I don't think it's a driver issue. I think it's more just due to the game's engine and possibly being a sort of poor PC port from the consoles. Nonetheless, the 2900 XT does manage to keep the frame rate pretty close to the 30 FPS mark in 1080p. Supreme Commander is up next and back for more blood. This game whips both of these cards into submission, but the 2900 XT does provide a nice boost to the frame rates here, nearly keeping the frame rate in 1280 by 1024 above 30 frames per second. These numbers are actually not that far off from what my first custom built PC could produce in this game back in the day. Crysis rounds out our benchmarks once again, and this is another game where the 2900 XT really shines. The poor 7900 GTX shows its weakness here, with its average frame rate barely able to keep up with the 2900 XT's minimum frame rate at 1080p. Taking a look at the overall performance numbers from our two contenders, we can see that the difference at 1024 by 768 is really only evident when looking at the minimum frame rates. The 2900 XT has a much bigger impact at higher resolutions, especially at 1280 by 1024. These numbers really shouldn't be that surprising though, since the 1900 XT was already able to beat the 7900 GTX in my last video. Adding the cards from my previous videos, we can see the performance increase from the 1900 XT to the 2900 XT. While it is a nice boost, it's certainly not the insane boost that we saw coming from the 6800 GS to the 7900 GTX. I think I must have jinxed myself in the last video when I said that I hoped that the next video would go a bit smoother. I had so many frustrating issues making this video that I was honestly ready to quit. The first thing I ran into was just general bad performance in every game. So every game I tried, no matter what drivers I was using, performed about as well as a car with square wheels trying to drive up the side of a mountain. I finally decided to reinstall Windows XP, the drivers, and all the games, only to find out that it ultimately, for whatever reason, was caused by GPU-Z. So that was a lot of wasted time. The second issue I ran into was the drivers. I tried many drivers, including 13.4 and 12.1, and those drivers installed fine, but the performance in Painkiller and Half-Life when I started my benchmarks was just awful. In some of them I wasn't even able to get to install. Like 10.2 kept telling me that there wasn't a compatible card in the system. So I went back to the Omega 7.12 drivers. And I do feel that the 7.12 drivers probably hurt the card's performance in other games, especially F.E.A.R. So, I fixed issues in some games, but then, hurt others. So it was a really give and take scenario. I also had more issues than normal with my crappy capture card, so that's why there's been far less gameplay footage in this video. And I also had to re-record all of the audio for this video because there was some issue with my editing software. So thank you all for watching, and please check back again soon to see my next video. If you have any input on where I should go with these videos in the future, please leave a comment. I'm sort of nearing the end of the cards that I really wanted to benchmark in XP, so I can either continue benchmarking cards in XP, test cards in Windows 7, go back to some early XP era cards, or check out some cards running in Windows 98. So let me know. Thanks again for watching.